right now there are no dinner parties, obviously, but like when there were dinner parties, you run into this meeting and like this 21-year-old has raised $300 million. And you're like, oh my God, I'm like 27 already and I've only raised $100 million. Yes, so these are just, I don't know, it's just crazy comparisons.
What's up, everyone? This is Justin Kahn. Welcome to my podcast, The Quest, where I dive into the ups and downs of trailblazers around me to help you figure out life and get to where you want to be. As always, you know what to do. Smash subscribe and ring that bell for new, unfiltered conversations dropping every Tuesday. Today, my guest is Laura Behrens Wu. Laura is one of the entrepreneurs that I admire most in Silicon Valley. She started a company and became a CEO at 22, which is pretty tough. In our conversation, we talk about growing up in Silicon Valley and everything she's learned in the past decade. Okay, and we're live. There we go. Laura, what's up? Thanks for joining me. Now's the time.
Now's the time.
Cool. So, well, I know your background and your entrepreneurial story a little bit. I was listening to your podcast, the video you did at the YC Female Founders Conference today, and then I listened to the podcast you did on, I forgot the name of the podcast, but it was like, now I'm going to sound super unprofessional, but it was like this one with where you told the whole story of Shippo. But just for the audience and the listeners out there, can you tell us a little bit about how you started your company and how you came to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, of course. So I'm originally from Germany. I honestly have never been to Silicon Valley before until 2014. And I was working at a few different startups in Europe, in Berlin, in Zurich. And you read about Silicon Valley and TechCrunch, and it seems like this utopia, this crazy place to be. So and it is a utopia and a crazy place to be. But yeah, at one point in time, I was starting to just apply for summer jobs on AngelList, and just go through the list, applying for like all kinds of different startups. I did not really hear back from any of those startups, but I just kept applying. And then at a startup event in Zurich, I by chance bumped into a guy who told me that he was a YC founder. So I talked to him about it, and he was friendly, and he said if I was interested, I could send him my resume, and he would forward that to the YC mailing list. So I followed up on that. I sent him my resume and made sure that he forwarded it to the group. And then overnight, I got just a bunch of interview invitations for summer jobs, summer internships, and talked to a bunch of founders. I don't remember what batch that was, but yeah, I talked to a bunch of founders that were just going through YC or coming out of YC, and eventually landed a job at a company called LendUp, and they were around, I think, pre-Series A at that point in time, so less than 20 people, and working out of a small office in around Union Square in San Francisco. So I came over and just started working there as a jack of all trades on the go-to-market, on the customer acquisition side of things. And honestly, San Francisco is nothing what I imagined it to be. It was not in a bad way.
What did you imagine?
Honestly, I
what
read
did you
about
think beforehand, and then
Yes. So I read about it on TechCrunch, right? So it just seemed I imagined it to be a Singapore, and just SkyTrains everywhere. I don't know, just some kind of crazy just a very I guess
a city of the future.
Exactly, a city of the future. And then you come to San Francisco and you realize all of the VCs, they're in this one strip mall at Sand Hill Road. They're all clustered in there, and you drive there and there's just one sign and all the VCs are in this one location. It's just not really what you thought it would be. It's much less glamorous. But anyway, so I was at LendUp, and just in my now co-founder and I, we went to school together. So we'd always talked about starting a company and wanting to come to San Francisco, to Silicon Valley, to check this out, to eventually be able to start a company. And just couldn't come up with any good ideas. But I think that the main point, or the main thought that we had was let's just build something. We'll figure it out. We'll just start building. And we decided to build an e-commerce store. And that e-commerce store, that kind of spiraled into a shipping software startup. We were selling just products on the internet, using Shopify, using Stripe, just selling stuff. and then realized that shipping is really hard. It was like everything is easy to do. Shopify makes it easy, Stripe makes it easy, and when it came to shipping, you had to walk to the USPS store, which is not a fun experience. And why are the USPS APIs, the FedEx APIs not as like easy and straightforward and developer friendly as the Stripe API or the Twilio API? So that was where this came from. And you know, the founder I worked for, he always, like, at every all hands, at every team meeting, he would say stuff like, build something that's a painkiller, not a vitamin. And like that was he just kept saying that every time. And when we
That was Sasha.
That was Sasha, yes. And when we found this shipping problem, we realized it is a real pain point. And like building something that's solving real pain points for real people is really gratifying. So that's how we got started. And that was like, I don't know, sometime between 2014 and 2015.
So you were pretty young when you started your company, right? This was just after you'd been a summer intern at LendUp.
Yeah.
Like, what was the process? I guess when I first started my first company, I was 21 when we started Kiko, which was funded by that first batch of YC. Mm-hmm. And like, I just felt like we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
You know, everything we did everything the wrong way. We fucked up like every single thing we did.
Yes.
Like from hiring employees to fundraising, like every single thing we did like the wrong way.
Yeah.
Like, I'm curious what the experience was like for you starting so young.
Yeah, it's a deep question, and I think we'll unpeel the onion. I'll start with the broadest or the highest level answer. I think we just really did not know what we were getting ourselves into. Like, we did not know what it means to start a company. We had some customer problem we wanted to solve, and in order to do that, we had to incorporate, and that's what we did. And like, when the question was who's going to be the CEO, who's going to be something else, like, I was just a little more extroverted than my co-founders, so we decided, yeah, sure, I'm the CEO. And I honestly had no idea what it meant to be a CEO. It's just very naive. I was probably 22 at that point in time, and it did not, like, being a CEO comes with responsibilities, comes with, like, I had no idea what that meant, and just signed up for it. And we had more important problems to solve at that point in time. Like, it didn't mean anything to be a CEO of a company with like no employees, no revenue, no customers. So like, our problems back then were to get customers, get revenue, start shipping packages, start hiring people, and then it just spiraled. You are, I think as a CEO, you just have to, like, every day I'm feeling like I'm behind. Like, right now we're maybe 170 people at Shippo. We're trying to be 300 people by the end of the year. I have, like, as you said, before this, I was a summer intern. Like, I am in no way qualified to be a CEO of a 300-person company, but you just have to learn on the job. And like, the way I do that is, like, I think what San Francisco is incredible for is there are all these smart people. Like, we met through friends of friends. Like, a bunch of people I know have gone through exactly the same kind of stuff. They've made exactly the same kind of mistakes. And most people are just like pretty accessible to talk about these mistakes. But yeah, I mean, right now we're again in one of these stages where like everything seems to be breaking in a good kind of way because we're growing fast. But if I just look back at all the mistakes I made, I think we'd be a much bigger company now if I didn't make these mistakes. But yeah, from hiring to firing to just communication, I've made so many mistakes.
There's a couple of stories that remind me of from my own experience. Like, when we were 4 guys starting Justin TV, a company that turned into Twitch, my co-founder Michael went and did the fundraising because he was like the business guy, right? And so we all had like almost no experience, but he was like the one who had worked in finance before, kind of in finance. He was a fundraiser for a Senate campaign, and they lost the Senate race, and so he was out of a job, and he decided to join Justin TV. But I remember he went and fundraised, and all the investors were like, "Are you the CEO?" And he was kind of like, "Oh no, Justin is," because it was like my idea, I guess. Yes. And so I was default the CEO. Yes. And he actually changed it so that he was the CEO in the deck to solve that problem. And then that was like how we decided who would become the CEO. It was like a very awkward conversation between friends. where he was like, yeah, I feel like it'll be easier for me to fundraise if I'm the CEO. And I was
Yes.
like, oh, okay, I guess like, that's fine. And then that's what happened, how we like, for years, that's what, like, he was the CEO of the company.
Yeah.
But we still made all these decisions together. It was like,
Yes.
we didn't really have like a real, one throat to choke. And I mean, it was such an ass backwards way to decide like who would be CEO,
No, I know. I think
Um,
back then it's just like we had to file this. We had to file this letter or incorporation thing in Delaware, and like it had this form needs to be filled out, and we don't have much time, so let's fill it out and just put something in. I also I don't know. I
yeah.
remember like my co-founder Simon. Like, he used to be much more of a engineering and product facing just a leader, and didn't really want to come fundraising with us or with me. And then I like at some point the VCs are just like they want to see the co-founder, and he did not want to come, and I had to like tell him, like VCs have Soylent and bananas in their fridge. You should just come and grab some Soylent. And yeah, he did show up.
You had to lure him with Soylent. I love
Yes.
that. The other thing you mentioned that resonated with me was saying like, before this year summer intern, now you have 170 people and, you don't know what you're doing right
Yeah.
now. And I found that one of the things that I've observed about being a founder is that you always feel like you're failing to some degree because you're either actually failing
Yes.
and then you have to figure things out and like, and it feels pretty bad, or you're
Yes.
succeeding and you're doing something you've never done before
Yes.
because your company's bigger. You've never
Yep.
managed a 170 person organization, or next year you'll never have managed a 300
Yes.
person organization. And, your functional teams now need to be cross-functional.
Yes.
Your cross-functional teams now need to go back to being functional or whatever
Yeah.
it is. And so there's this feeling of being of always drowning when you're
Yes.
as a founder,
Yes.
even when you're winning.
No, I think that's exactly right. And it's like always like a little uncomfortable. And like last year I made the mistake of like once just saying to a few people that after I've hired some people that, I feel like I'm living my best life right now. I made all these hires and everything's great and everything's awesome. And then one of them had to leave for unexpected reasons. I was like, oh my God, I jinxed it. I should not have said that. But yes, I feel like whenever you start getting into a spot where things start feeling good, suddenly something very unexpected and very fucked up happens and you have to deal with it. Yeah. There's always that pattern.
So tell me about some of those times. Like, what's the hardest thing well, okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
I'll prompt you. Like, one of the things I read was that you had to pitch for your seed round 125
Yes.
investors
Yes.
to get to 10 yeses.
Yes. So, but honestly, like in hindsight, I don't think that was one of the hardest things. Like I got quite
Okay.
a lot of energy out of it. But yes, the true story is like back then I really did not know how to pitch people and who to pitch. I think by now, you only want to pitch like real angels and real funds, not people who've done an investment once in their life. And even though they're taking meetings, like this meeting will probably not lead to anything. You also don't want to take meetings with funds that are not investing in at your stage, right? Like at that point in time, I just didn't know any of these rules, and I was pitching anyone who was willing to listen and anyone who's ever invested in a company before. So I don't know, we got a lot of meetings, so that's good. We got a lot of meetings and a lot of no's. And at the end, I think I had a spreadsheet where I just kept track of people. It was more than 125 people that we've met. And it was a good way to practice pitching, though. I think at the end of the day, I've just heard all of the questions that people would ask before. And then I was able to have good answers when the right people were asking similar questions. But yeah, I mean, if I just have to think about things that were really hard, I think there are a few things that are really hard. At some point, when you start a company, you bring on a bunch of people and like they're all generalists. No one knows what they're doing. They're all like the kind of summer intern types of people, but they're hardworking, they're hard charging, they're like a good group of folks, and they're trying to figure it out. And then when things start working, you realize that actually you need specialists, and those people that have gotten you this far, especially the early group that's like the first 10, the first 15 people who feel like, I don't know, you should be loyal to them. Like at some point you realize that in order for you to get to the next stage, you need to bring on people that have done it before. and you need to find different roles for these people, or for the existing people, or you need to manage them out. So like that was one stage in the company that I personally found really hard, because I am a loyal person. I want to like be able to have people in the company grow with the company, but then if the company is growing too fast, it is the responsibility of the CEO to make those hard decisions and to bring other people in that can help the company grow faster. And like, I think by now I have the kind of vocabulary or mental models to articulate it in a better way, where like the right way is like to look at it is that, I don't know, like you might own or the team member, they might own all of marketing, but the company stays small, or they own like a part of marketing, but it's a much bigger pie. But I think at that point in time, I just didn't have the right words to articulate what was going on and the changes that we're going through, and probably burned a few bridges there that were just like not fun to burn. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I bet you've had those experiences as well. I bet every founder's gone through exactly this. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those experiences, because in the beginning when you're starting off, even especially having never worked at a real company, like I had only been a summer intern as well. The first people who will join your team, you're like, okay, you're the head of marketing,
Yes.
you're the VP of engineering, you're the CTO,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like the quality or the experience level of the person that you can hire to be the CTO of your
Yes.
company at a 10-person company and a 50-person company and a 150-person
Yeah.
company and a 1,000-person company are
Exactly.
completely different. And so it's almost like, the way I started phrasing it to my team, I remember, was that, if you are a successful executive at a company, you might go to manage a group of like 500 people or like 1,000 people after a 30-year career, right? And so that means if you start from 0 or 1% or whatever, the number of doublings, that's like, you have to double your headcount, like that you can manage it's like 5 years, I think, right? 6 doublings, 5 years. And that's a lot of time to do it. But in a startup, you might double your headcount every 1 year or 18 months, and if you were then be the head of the
Yes.
engineering group or marketing group or the go-to-market or whatever. And so the probability, just from a pure statistical standpoint, it is very improbable that any of us like are qualified to
Yes.
do it, and we'll do it that fast. And there really shouldn't be any self-judgment around that,
Yeah.
And as the CEO, you get like a little bit of special support from the investors and from your executives that you're hiring, who
Yeah.
maybe have experience and can lend you experience.
Yes.
But we don't really have that same infrastructure for the early team members.
Yes.
And so that's what causes this kind of mismatch,
Yes. Yeah, no, and then that happens every few years again, or like if you do well, it happens
Yeah.
every few years again. So it's a conversation that never stops, like a conversation that I think one can get better at. But yeah, I think at the beginning it's just this kind of fear if you've never fired anyone before, you've never had these hard conversations before. And I think most people, like most kids even growing up, they're taught to like that these hard conversations are uncomfortable, and you don't want to be in this uncomfortable situation. It triggers fight or flight, and like you feel your body being really tense. So I mean, it's just, yeah, I wish someone would have taught me earlier how to give like honest feedback without making it tense or uncomfortable. But yeah, I think these are things you have to learn.
How did you get?
How
did you get comfortable with that?
So, I mean, I think what you said about the support group, like I do have a few CEO friends that I talk to a bunch, but then also a coach that I talk to. And I think these conversations are not less uncomfortable right now, or they are less uncomfortable. Like I coming from, I used to be the kind of person who would like avoid giving feedback, or like just suck things up, or be like, oh, it wasn't that bad, until like it all accumulates and it's just too bad, and then you have to have a really serious conversation. And I think it is probably the natural to a bunch of people, and to act that way. So I like by now I've like started just even small feedback points that are not like too big of a deal. Like I'm just raising them, and because they're not too big of a deal, I can do that in a nice and friendly way, so that no one like so that these things get out of the way and nothing like adds up and accumulates. And that's helped me quite a lot. And I don't know, at the beginning I thought I'd be petty raising tiny things and like just always giving feedback about like issues that are not a big deal. But by now, it just feels much better to get it off my plate, and I think it's also much better for the team to know what I'm actually thinking, and that's been good. That's been good. But the really uncomfortable conversations, they're still uncomfortable. But I think by now I also think about it from the perspective of like ideally I'm dealing with team members, and like by now I'm dealing with team members who are like more senior, more of the execs. So they've had those conversations before. They should like. I'm not as much managing them, but like we're always in communication around like what's going on, what's going well, what's not going well. So it's also just become easier as I'm dealing with more senior people. But yeah, at the beginning, when you're just a group of young people who've never had jobs before, it's really hard because there are a lot of feelings, lots of ego.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience. I was so scared to give people feedback, and I thought I was, it was something negative.
Yeah.
And it was only very recently, a couple of years ago, that I realized like, oh, feedback is a gift.
Yes.
Getting it, and even if it's hard to hear, and giving it, even if it's hard to deliver and hard
Yes.
for the other person to hear, is the only way that you can improve. And so really having that mindset shift helped me a lot, in terms of just being willing to be in that, like, I'm going to be uncomfortable in this moment, but it's because I'm doing it in service of this other person.
And most people think feedback is like inherently a negative word, but feedback is not criticism. Like feedback can also be positive feedback. Yeah. Which, by the way, was also something that I had to learn in a way that, like, for myself, I'm very, my motivation comes intrinsically, so I kind of know whether or not I've done well. I don't need someone else to tell me. I look at the outcome like, okay, this is a good outcome. But then most people, they do want to hear it from others. And it is, like, talking about the responsibilities of a CEO, like, I've never really realized that people would care about what I have to say or the praise that I have to give. But it turns out that coming from a CEO, it's so much more meaningful. And it's also very meaningful if you don't say anything positive about it. But yeah, that was another like new learning, not super recently, but I think as part of the journey of a CEO, that actually people care very much about what I have to say, and if I don't say it, like, people will notice too.
Yeah, they care the most.
Yes.
They're like dissecting everything you say.
Yes.
And talking about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and easy to be misunderstood as well.
Yeah, the over-communicate. I think people don't realize how much communication and over-communication and feedback and like that as a CEO who's of a growing company, you have to work on that constantly and improve. And that's not really, I guess, so few people have had the experience. It's not really something that people understand. It's in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I think on that one, I think it's again one of these things I've been able to just rely on my more senior leaders now to like amplify what I'm saying, to help me reiterate, help me clarify when people misunderstand. So that's been really good. But it feels like these kinds of resources, they become available to you as you grow. Like when we were a really small business, like just getting started, none of these more senior people would have wanted to work at Shippo. So it's more like an evolution of, we're now this size and now we can attract these kinds of people. And I bet like 2-3 years from now we can attract very different people again, and it'll again be eye-opening around like, wow, this is what best in class looks like. So I'm looking forward to that.
One thing you touched on was building a support network and a coach, getting a CEO coach. Can you talk a little bit about how you learned to ask for help?
Yeah. So, good question. So, I think let's see. The coach came from a pretty specific story. I was working with one of our earlier team members, working with the team, and there was one engineer, and the engineer quit, and like in the conversation after he quit, like asking why, I asked him why, and he was just saying like, well, you're not at all like Steve Jobs, and he's just expecting something else from a CEO. And I think he had lots of other reasons as well, but in that moment, like that just hit really hard. So I was talking to coaches that are out there, and like also asked one of my board members to see if there's any coach that I could work with. And when I went to see that coach, I think the first thing I was expecting, or I asked him, was like, can you teach me how to be like Steve Jobs? And he was like, yes. And he was like, no, wait, like that's not really what coaching's about. So that was a fun conversation, and I think it was much more just about getting to understand like what leadership style I'm comfortable with, like what's most authentic to me, and then amplifying or like working with that instead of trying to be someone else. And that's helped me quite a lot as well. I think like at the beginning of this journey, I was much more trying to be like this professional Laura at work, who's different from like the Laura in private life. And it's just very tiring to try to be a different persona at work than you are at home. So yeah, that's been a really good journey. That's just, you know, lifting some weight off my shoulders. And then let's see, around like how to ask for help. I think honestly, like Silicon Valley does make it easy for founders, because there's so many founders around, and like I'm just as we're talking, like you have stories that kind of sound like mine, and like it just like even without asking for help, like just hearing those stories, knowing that other people have gone through the exact same thing and it's not just me, makes it a lot easier. So I've liked that a lot about San Francisco. I think that's one of the main upsides. If you're feeling less lonely, you're feeling less like you're fucking up, but you're realizing that actually everyone's going through the same stuff.
Yeah, it's surprising how much that's the case. You know, before our conversation, I probably could have said, here's what I think your startup journey was like, you know, and outlined a lot of
yes.
experiences that I had, that, you know, here's like the awkward way that, you know, you had to let go of the first employee because you failed to give him feedback for like a year, you know, or
yes.
like,
yeah.
here's the way, you know, like things like that. And it's like, I've had that experience. You sounds like you've had many of them. And then there's hundreds of CEOs who've had the same, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so it's funny how that works. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I really love about Silicon Valley.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
But I wanted to dig in on one thing you said, which is finding your authentic leadership style,
Mm-hmm.
and learn more about kind of how you did that. Like how did you become comfortable with that? Because for myself, for a long time, I just had this vision of like what a CEO was supposed to be, you know, and I was trying to be this other thing that, and maybe like I looked up to friends of mine who were being more successful, like Drew from Dropbox or something like that. And I was like, I just need to be like that, you know, and I was never really happy trying to do that.
Yeah.
But it took me so long to like be comfortable with just like, okay, I'm going to be the best Justin I can be, you know, and I'm curious what that journey was like for you.
Yeah, let's see. I don't think I've consciously thought about what, like I'll probably ramble a little before I get to the right answer. But I think what it was just like for me was, like, as you said, when you try to be someone else, it's just really, really tiring, and always feels like you're a bit behind. And at some point, I think it was probably with my coach, in conversations with my coach, just talking about like what I believe in, and then like I think we had many conversations about like just how I wish I acted versus like how I actually showed up, and that then helped with, you know, realizing first of all that there's a discrepancy, which is something like realizing that it feels like it's a first way or first step to the solution. And then getting there, I think it was about being just very honest also with the new team members that I brought on board, about like what my weaknesses are, and then what I'm trying to work on. And I think at the beginning, when I was just bringing on like all of these, like, or at the beginning when the team was very small and I was like kind of trying to be someone I'm not, like team members might not know what my weaknesses were, and then they were also projecting who they thought I was, and just like being very honest about this is where I'm good at, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not good at, like these are the things that I can help with, these are the things where just like I don't have a strong opinion about and you should just figure it out, and like these are my operating principles, this is what gets me really annoyed. And like I think these are like writing out the operating principles has been super helpful for me as well, because then just acknowledging like this is what triggers me, and I've always known that these things trigger me. I just like have never wanted to admit it. I just wanted to like hide it, or like I didn't want to be triggered. I wanted to pretend as if I wasn't triggered. I wanted to be that kind of better person. But no, like now I'm just admitting that these things trigger me, and this is how I like to work, and like just being very upfront and honest about that. And then it does help a little bit. Like honestly, for me it helps a tiny bit to be over Zoom instead of in person, because in person, and I mean I don't mean that for the strategic meetings. I mean like when you're in the office, like every second you're in the office, you're just being watched. Like every minute, like when you're just getting coffee, when you're going to the kitchen, people are always looking at my facial expression, and like I just have a resting bitch face between meetings because I'm tired, and I don't know, I'm just like relaxing my facial muscles. I'm not always smiling, and that like, people misinterpret that at times. Yeah, so it's been like really good to be able to turn the camera off and then go to get my coffee and not smiling, and then go back and be back like full on during meetings.
That resonates with me actually, because I remember one time there was like a rumor that I was like super pissed in the office. You know, I also like look like, I have an intense look a lot of times when I'm, you know, just thinking about something or whatever. And people were legitimately worried about like my state of mind, you know, because of like my facial expressions while walking to the water cooler or whatever.
Yeah, no, but that happens, right? Like people see me and my co-founder in a conference room at a time that like we don't have our scheduled one-on-one, and they're like, what are they talking about? Are they talking about layoffs? No, we're just catching up. Yeah. I think that is a strange adjustment though, that people care so much about like your facial expressions, what you said, what you didn't say. Yeah, I was never that super popular kid in school, so like no one really cared about what I said or didn't say in high school or college. So that was like a strange adjustment.
For sure. I want to ask about if there were any like mindset shifts that you had to change as you like kind of, you came from Germany, right? Which is probably, I'm assuming, kind of like a much different culture than was here in Silicon Valley. And like as you came here and grew up here, like what changed for you?
Ooh, what changed for me? I want to think of, I mean, so one of my friends said something that I found quite insightful, which is like, live like a European but work like an American. And I think that is the right attitude. I do think people here in the US are much better about just giving it all at work and much more passionate about work. And Germans or Europeans in general, I think there's much more of a work and life is separated and is, I don't know, you go home and then you don't think about it, work anymore. For me, that's super hard. I just love what I'm doing so much. I want to think about it all the time. But let's see, what's changed as my mindset? I think it's you think much bigger here in Silicon Valley. It's just anything is possible, and people are not thinking about, like at the beginning I used to pitch European VCs as well, in addition to American VCs, and they always wanted to know what the exit strategy was. They wanted to know what like the 3 or 5 year plan was, and that was when we were still like a tiny company. There was no 3 to 5 year plan. I can't even tell you what's going to happen next year, next month. But yeah, I think people were just much more narrow or smaller in their thinking. And in San Francisco, you know, people are working on colonizing Mars. They're working on all kinds of just crazy shit. So like figuring shipping out in comparison to that is a much smaller challenge. So it just puts things into perspective, and it makes me think much bigger as well. Like some of my board members, they ask me like, what about, I don't know, shipping to Mars? It is a crazy idea. We're far from that, but at least they're asking these kinds of questions. They're not asking me about when I'm selling the company. So so yeah, I think much bigger picture thinking, or the ambitions are significantly larger. I also think there's much less hierarchy in the US. Like I'm able to talk to, or people are willing to talk to entrepreneurs, and people are willing to talk to entrepreneurs no matter where they are in their career, and they're always willing to pay forward, which I think is quite special about the place. And then at least until fairly recently, even now, I think entrepreneurs, it is an exciting job. Like people want to be entrepreneurs, which is different in Europe. Like in Europe, I think People want to be bankers, they want to be consultants, they don't want to be entrepreneurs. And it is kind of awesome that people want to be entrepreneurs here in the US.
Awesome. I think earlier we talked a little bit about the toughest moments, and I suggested that one of them might have been fundraising, but you said that was relative. That wasn't that hard.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to that and
Yes.
ask you, like, what have been the toughest moments of
Yes.
founding?
Yes, I think there are different tough moments. Like fundraising was not that tough. I think it's just something that keeps occurring, a necessary evil. But it feels kind of different because you're working with VCs, and VCs are supposed to say no. That's kind of their job. So I want to say it is their job. I still take it personal, but it does not feel that bad. I think it is really the relationship stuff, the people stuff in the office at work that contribute to some of the hardest moments. Like you are not prepared for having conversations with a team member who's like gotten really sick and therefore has to quit. Like these are just conversations that no one's prepared you for. And I think it's like a bunch of these conversations of like taking care of the team and realizing that you need to do right by the team, and then you also have business goals, because when someone tells you like they've gotten really sick and they need to quit, like it's someone you've worked with, you really care about them, but then immediately your mind kind of also goes to, what about this year's goals? Like how are we going to do that? And it's a hard balance.
Yeah, I had so many of those moments. Like, I think that people often don't see the emotional weight that it is
Yes.
to be a founder and to like carry like these difficult conversations
Yes.
that you have no preparation for, right? Like you
Yes.
have no experience on, and especially like, I mean, it was the same for me. Like I had never had a real job before.
Yeah.
And then like before starting a company, and then I was managing people, and then I was like not giving them feedback, and then I was letting them go, and like couldn't look them in the eye,
Yes. Oh,
you know, when
got
I
that
was
too,
when I was saying it, because I had let the situation go too far
Yes.
south. And you know, that is so difficult at times to have that experience. But I guess in the, you know,
and I mean, I don't want to say like, you know, we are as founders in a very fortunate position, and like that kind of it is a responsibility, but it's also just really grateful for that responsibility. I don't think anyone would have hired me to be their CEO, but there are times, you know, when you read like when the company is much smaller and we tried to scale something up that wasn't ready to scale yet, and we had to like make a riff there, and it was the right thing to do for the company. But I did not know how to articulate that in the best way, and then you read the Glassdoor reviews and you're like, no, I'm not like that kind of monster that you're describing me to be. I was really trying to be like to do what I thought was best for the company. But these are really painful moments. There is one Glassdoor review that's like it's very, very painful from, I don't know, 4 years ago.
can I ask you what it said?
I honestly don't remember the details anymore, but it's pretty long, and it was about like how the founders had no idea what they were doing and were really bad at running this business, and just like that kind of stuff, or that kind of narrative. It did feel vindictive, but it was like it was as part of like one of those riffs that we made, or one riff that we made because of an acquisition strategy that didn't scale. But I think it just assumed that. Or the assumption was just that I think it was painful because part of it rang true. Like we really have never done this before, but like is coming from the perspective of we were being deliberately assholes about it, which was for sure not the case.
Yeah, there's sometimes there's this assumption of malintent and incompetent. You know, they like you don't get the benefit of the doubt, right? And it feels like, you know, that can be super tough. I mean, I've had more than my fair share of those where people are like, you know, he's not focused, he's not interested in this, he's like we're too scattered, we hired the wrong people like as managers, and like the long laundry list of things I've done to people that they've written about on Glassdoor can be painful.
Yeah, I think the reality is also like, probably you are already, or at least I was already aware of like some of these were mistakes, or like some of these were maybe hiring mistakes or whatever, but you have to fix them, and fixing them is painful, but not fixing them would be even worse. Not fixing those mistakes would be even worse, but fixing them means that you have to like I don't know, let go of a few people, or like downsize a function that didn't work out, or like cut a launch that was not good. And then people, I think by now, if there's one thing I learned, was just to be like brutally transparent about this, and just like not try to hide it from people, but just have honest conversations about it. But I think back then you also have the thought of like, what can I share, what can I not share, and but I like in hindsight, I think transparency always wins. But yeah, it is on the CEO to make these hard decisions, and then others from the outside, or like others in the team, they see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, it's such a different perspective from the ground versus from the CEO seat. It's sometimes like when I was a founder of like when we were 10 people or whatever, or 15 people, and I'd hear about things that happened at big companies, I'd be like, oh, those big companies are so stupid. Why don't they just fix their problem?
Yes.
And like, so they could just do it tomorrow, fix the problem tomorrow, like assign a team to it or hire different people. But then when you have a company that's hundreds of people, let alone thousands, like fixing problems takes time, and you have to, it's like personnel replacement and changing your goals, but you can't do that like every month or whatever. So, oftentimes there's these situations on the ground that seem like very obvious how to fix, but then, from the as management of the company, it's like, maybe that's just not the priority this week, and there's like a laundry list of other problems that you have to deal with.
Yeah, no, I think from an idealistic perspective, it should be easy to fix, but then when you're in the weeds and you have to execute this yourself, you realize that there are a bunch of operational constraints, and just, they're real constraints, and it just takes a little longer to fix. You can't just rip off the Band-Aid immediately. There's some other things that need to happen first.
So we might have covered some of this, but like, I'm curious what it's been like for you to kind of grow up in tech, as we talked about, grow up in this as a leader in Silicon Valley, and how that's affected you.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of weird thing. I started the company when I was around 22, I think, and then you do kind of I came of age in Silicon Valley, meaning like I was an adult at 22 already, but like turning into a real adult. And it's let's see, I think it starts with, it is an incredible opportunity, just like starting with the real positives here. I think it's no one would have given me this kind of responsibility at any other company. Like, I would have gotten an entry-level job at any other company, and it does provide, like, it's an entire career compressed into like 5-6 years at Shippo, which is amazing. And it's just it's an awesome fast track. And then being able to work with like best in class people and learn from them. Like by now we're able to hire them, and I'm able to work alongside of them. I'm able to experience them in meetings myself, and just like be with people in the room who have a higher bar than I am, who've done this many times at other companies before. So that's incredible. I think there's always, like the other day, as I'm outside of San Francisco right now, the other day I went into the city to like take a few meetings, and when I'm in the city, it's just I can't sleep as well. Like, my heart rate is higher. I feel the energy, the stress level of like I have to work, and there are all these startups out there, and like everyone's trying to be competitive, and everyone's raised bigger rounds than we have. So how do we, like, it's just a very real feeling. And these are not things that we should want to compete on, but like right now there are no dinner parties, obviously, but like when there were dinner parties, you run into this meeting and like this 21-year-old has raised $300 million, and you're like, oh my God, I'm like 27 already, and I've only raised $100 million. Yes, so these are just, I don't know, it's just crazy comparisons, and you're always on this treadmill, which is, quite frankly, like, I think for the stage that we're at, still a good treadmill to be on. Like, I'm not super into the giving up all of my edges just yet, because I feel like these edges, they push me to where we need to be. They push me to work harder. But these edges are real. And like, yeah, in San Francisco, I can't sleep that well. I wake up at night thinking that I missed my meetings. I dream about like being in the car to Palo Alto and not finding the Sand Hill Road office that I'm supposed to be at. So it is kind of crazy.
I know, it's people don't believe it, but it's crazy how
Yeah.
much the comparison monkey mind works,
Yes.
even when you're successful.
Yes.
Anyone out there is gonna be like, oh, Laura's, you're still in her 20s, right? Like
Yeah,
in her
yeah.
20s, has a 170-person company that's raised $100 million, that's used by 50,000 merchants, right, or more.
Yes.
And that's like a huge success. And then
Yes.
you can be inside yourself saying, oh, but there's this other kid who's raised
Yes.
$300 million.
Yes.
And that's how I felt. I
Yes.
was like, even after we sold Twitch, I was like, well, my friends started Dropbox or Airbnb or
Yeah.
Stripe or any of these
Yes.
other numerous companies that are orders of magnitude larger. Like I didn't feel good about it after, when I was in that comparison mindset.
Yeah, no, I think
can
that's
happen to
very
anyone.
real. Of like you're always comparing yourself to other people out there, and there's always someone who's done something bigger and better. But yeah, I think like I know that you've gotten really into just shedding those mental models. I think I'm personally still at a stage where it helps me, like it serves a purpose that I'm like kind of comparing myself to other people, and it's not, given that I'm aware of it and I know what purpose it serves. I still enjoy it as a tool of like, yes, I should put in the extra hour and I should like push myself a little harder, because we're not there yet. Like we are very far from achieving our vision, and and it is exhilarating. Like it is everything's breaking and it's crazy, and it's like I don't know how we're gonna hit our revenue targets, but like it will work out one way or the other, and it is kind of this awesome feeling to still be on the treadmill.
Well, yeah, and so comparison actually isn't bad, right? Like I think sometimes, like my first instinct was like, oh, I need to stop, or like when I started my wellness journey, focused journey, I was like, oh, I should stop comparing myself to others. The thing that really helped me was to realize like, oh, like wanting other people to accept me or approve of me or wanting to be successful, like comparing myself to other people, those were all tools, right?
Yeah.
Like they were
Yes.
like ways of coping with the world. And like, because of, when I was a kid, I didn't feel like I got that attention or whatever. And so I had all these tools of like, okay, I'm going to make myself into something, super powered and be successful. And then I'll be liked, or whatever. And that was the first step for me, was to accept like, oh, that's like a tool to you that I was using. And then I could make a choice of like, okay, is that the right tool that I still want to use? And it sounds like for you, I mean, as you go down the journey of like becoming aware of it, then, that's it's an opportunity for you to like continue using that tool that you have, or like eventually to make a different choice if it serves you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it stops serving me at some point, I think you're exactly right. Like you can retire your tools, and they might not, like a tool that's serving you today might not serve you a year from now or 2 years from now. It's just continuously going through your tool set and seeing what's still working and what's not working. I think it's just, you start suffering when you're like stuck in those mental models that just have stopped serving you, but you're still subconsciously applying them. So yeah, that I totally agree with that. But I think for me, it's often I look at things and I'm like, it's like if this guy or if this person has been able to do it, like I should be able to do it as well. And that's kind of the comparison that I often like have for myself. Or like, how come that this like nonsensical business has raised this amount of money, and like this business that we have is like very sensible, like everyone needs to ship, like and then these are the kinds of comparisons that sometimes come to me.
Okay, switching gears a little bit. Any like I'm curious to ask, and I know you've talked about like how in the past you didn't want to be painted as a woman founder, right, or a female founder, but now you're more open to talking about it. I'm wondering, like, are there ways that you think it's been different or more challenging for you? Because I imagine like as a young when I was starting off, like no one took us seriously. I mean, it was partially the content of our business, which was like us trying to make a live streaming reality show about ourselves.
Yes.
But also, even after we pivoted from that, we were a platform for anyone to broadcast. People just like thought we were incompetent, like not good, like not, not serious.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was, I would look at like competitors of ours who were, the founders were older, they were maybe a little more professional, and they would raise like a lot more money. They would kind of be considered much more seriously, and
Yes.
I was always like that always pissed me off,
Yes.
like a tremendous amount. And I just wonder if what your experience was like as
Yeah.
a young founder, but also as
Yeah.
a woman.
So honestly, I do think that this like young founder being young, I've seen people make comments about that much more than about being female. So so let's see. On the young founder side, like I've walked into meetings earlier on where like the partners asked like, are you legal to sign, like are you of age yet to sign this contract? I'm like, haha, that's so funny, and everyone thought it was funny. It's not actually funny. And I think it's also an issue, at least like I sometimes perceive it as an issue in hiring, like wanting to be able to attract leaders that are very senior to work for someone who's much younger than them. So I've seen that. In terms of being a woman founder, I think honestly, like at the beginning when I came to San Francisco, it was like the female founder conversation was not a conversation just yet. So it was not something that I ever thought about as a limiting factor. And then the business that we have, it's an API business, a very technical business. So it feels like most of the time people talk about or we lead with the metrics and the gender stuff. I've never seen that really come up. I think, let's see, I think it is, by now I've seen being a female founder actually be positive in hiring. Like I see people who want to work for a female founder who like are excited about that. So that's been a plus recently even. But yeah, I think it's been something, where I try to, being a founder is already hard enough. I don't want to think about like being a female founder. So it is.
Right.
Yeah, it is one of these things where
you're not trying to put yourself in the
exactly,
box.
Exactly. I'm not trying to put myself into that box, but like obviously I am a female founder. And like one of the things that come up for women, not for men, is like fertility preservation, and that's something that I'm thinking about right now. It's like there are things that are just unique to women that they are more stressful at some point. Like I do want to have babies, and then I have to figure out like how to be pregnant while also running a company. So I envision that this like being a woman founder will actually have like raise much more challenges for me in the future than it's done for me in the past, because I'm just not at that stage yet where like I have to figure out how to be pregnant and run a company, or figure out how to nurse a child while being in meetings. But I'll face that at some point in time.
Well, I'm glad that it hasn't. You don't feel like it's affected you thus far. That reminds me of one time I was asked like, "What's it like to be an Asian founder?"
Yes.
And I was like, "Oh, I
Yes.
didn't realize it was any different."
Exactly.
Exactly.
It should not, and I think. I don't want to say that, like, I know that a lot of, like, even friends of mine have had the experience, like, women founders who've had the experience of it was actually different for them. So I don't want to say it's not different across the board. But for me, I've like tried to, it's not been different for me, and I've tried to like make a point that this is, we're talking about our business metrics, we're talking, I think in meetings I actually come across as a pretty intense person as well. So like, maybe all of that stuff helps, but I've never had it as a challenge.
It's the German accent. Exactly.
It's the German accent and talking about shipping.
The last question I have written down here is about fears and challenges. Like, are there any that you've worked through or are still working through that you faced?
Fears and challenges. Fears. I think there's always the fear for, I was just articulating that to the team, and I was really hoping not to be misunderstood, but like my main fear is, I don't want to be there 10 years from now and like see another company that's done exactly what I'm thinking about and what I'm discussing with my executive team today, and then look at like, oh wow, they did exactly what we wanted to do and they're super successful now, and we didn't manage to do what we said we'd do. So right now it's a fear around the execution, and like I'm trying to summarize it as like, you want to be the Shopify, not the Volusion, right? Like they had the exact same idea, building storefronts or website builder for e-commerce stores, like kind of the same idea, but like one became Shopify and the other is Volusion. So how do we not end up being the Volusion? How do we become the Shopify? And at this point, it is I do think it is a challenge about execution. So getting the right people there, getting people like inspired to do what I want them to do. And yeah, but it is like in meetings, like as you said, like sometimes you're 100 or we're 170 something people now, we're going to be bigger. It's just hard to get people, to convince people to do something that's like slightly different or even very different. And like, we just have to do this. Otherwise, like if we don't take this risk, like someone else might. And then if it turns out to be what turns you into a giant company, I don't want to be there and just look at someone else who's done exactly what I thought we should do. Yeah,
amazing.
so that's
well, I mean, that could be a huge driver of, motivator.
Yeah.
Right? Is that
yeah, but it's also
regret.
just a huge thing around like you have to be good at executing. You have to pick up the pace, the velocity. People need to be aligned. People all need to be working towards the same goal. And it is a very different kind of challenge than when we were a small business. It was just like about like throwing darts to the, like just running as hard as I could. And like it is not necessarily this kind of like coordinating, making people work together well, and assembling the right group of people. Just a very different kind of like role than the role that I started out with.
How is that? Like, do you like it? Like I've oftentimes people start a startup and they're like, because they're a programmer or a salesperson or a product person, and they love doing that part, and then they grow it, and all of a sudden, 5 years later, they're like, oh, I'm a manager, people manager, primarily. And like, how do you like how it's changed for you?
Yeah. So I think the very simple answer here is like, people like doing things that they're good at or that they're successful at. It's like right now we're doing well, so I like it, and I'm seeing the positive results of what we're doing. I think it would be very different if it wasn't going as well. But when things are going well and there's a big pull from the market, and just like e-commerce is exploding and e-commerce enablement is exploding alongside of it, and there's such a big pull from the market, you can kind of afford making a few small mistakes and it's still working really well. But yeah, right now I'm feeling good about it so far.
All right. I hope that continues forever. That's amazing. Cool, Laura. That's everything I had. Do you have any other things you'd want to talk about?
No, this is great. Kind of therapeutic. It's good.
I'm glad.